As we continue following Rudia's story, let's take a detour to explore what happened to Eris after their first night together.
私、ルーデウスの子猫が欲しいにゃん。
Yeah, boy.
We'll delve deeply into the events that transpired after she left Rudius and examine the challenges she encountered on her journey with Ghislaine, the Holy Land of the Sword, a place where the first sword god established his school and taught his disciples the way of the sword. For swordsmen, it is a destination to aim for, as well as a place of departure. And thus, the curtain on this story opened when a young woman arrived. Let's move to a scene that Eris, no matter how hard she tries to forget, is permanently etched in her mind. The times Orsted killed Rudius right in front of her. She trembled in fear when the dragon god looked into her eyes. It turns out this was a nightmare that Eris often experiences. Ghislaine heard her and said she screamed again. Eris said she had the dream again about what happened to Rudius and that she was completely powerless then. She explained that it was the first time she felt such intense fear just from being looked at. Here, Ghislaine explained the 7 great powers. They are the 7 strongest people in the world recorded on stone monuments made by the technique god. Among the 7 great powers, the dragon god ranks second. Excluding the technique god, whose existence is still questioned, he is the strongest being in the world. It is said that he has been missing for a long time, but Eris was very lucky to encounter him on her journey. Eris commented that encountering him was one thing, but it was another thing entirely that he killed Rudius. She explained that even so, right after that, Rudius immediately trained to fight the dragon god again and win. And when that time comes, she is sure to join the fight and become stronger so that the two of them can defeat Orsted. Ghislaine reminded her that God is not just a name and that he is indeed the strongest in the world. Even as a sword king, she is still far from being a god. She added that Orsted might even be stronger than the sword god, so it won't be easy to defeat him. Eris commented that she knows that, but she is sure that she and Rudius will defeat Orsted, and that's why she is going to the Holy Land of the Sword. Ghislaine said she could teach her if she desired something else, but if she wants to be taught by the sword god, it seems he might have something to offer. And so began the journey of Eris and Ghislaine to be taught by the sword god. While traveling, Eris explained that although she didn't expect much to become stronger, she was sure the Holy Land of the Sword was the best place to improve. After reaching the outskirts of the place, they immediately went to the dojo of the sword god. In the sword room, we are introduced to the number 5 of the 7 great powers, the sword god Galfarion. Eris arrogantly told him that she didn't have time for small fries like him, causing his subordinates to be irritated with Eris. Gal calmed them down and commented that he liked what he saw in Eris's eyes. When he asked whom Eris wanted to take down, she answered that it was the dragon god, which surprised the people there. Gal laughed loudly and acknowledged Eris's statement, saying he would indeed look like a small fry compared to the dragon god, and he didn't think there was another person who wanted to take him down besides himself. He then got serious and said it was easy to talk like that, and asked if Eris really could do it, to which Eris agreed. Because of this, Gal called Gino Brits, a sword saint, and their youngest member, to see what Eris could do. As Gino and Eris were being called to the center, Eris suddenly charged and attacked Gino. Eris's action garnered various reactions. She knocked down Gino with just one swing. When a woman approached to check on Gino, Gal immediately followed her into the sparring, and it turns out her name was Nina. Nina and another man exchanged glances. As they prepared in the center, Gal reminded Eris to stand in the middle first, and while surprise attacks were okay, he wanted to see what she could do in a duel. It turns out she was a Pharaon and also ranked as a sword saint. While preparing, Nina explained that their wooden sword had a metal core, so it wouldn't easily break. She also commented that what Eris did earlier was somewhat cowardly, so she would be the one to punish her. When the fight started, the two charged at each other with extraordinary speed, and when their swords clashed, Eris's broke. Thinking she had won, Nina swung to take down Eris, but unexpectedly, Eris punched her in the face. Eris followed up with a kick to Nina's body, sending Nina flying. While still in shock, Eris charged again and prepared another punch. Before Eris could be stopped, Nina had already received many bruises on her face. Eris saw the wooden sword on the ground and picked it up. Even though Nina was already down, Eris irritably kicked her again, commenting if all there were just naive children. This caused all of Gal's students to be enraged at her. Gal stood up and said it seems Eris had been misjudged, and he would be the one to fight her. As Gal walked and was about to draw his sword, Eris felt an unusual aura, forcing her to retreat and draw her real sword. Gal told Eris not to panic and that he would give her a handicap. He noticed Eris's sword and asked if it was one of Yulian's swords, to which Eris replied she didn't know and had just gotten it from a Migard. Gal explained that his sword was also one from Yulian. Ghislaine mentioned it was one of the 7 swords of the sword god, the cursed sword Notabu. She added that unless Gal was sparring with sword emperors, he wouldn't hold a real sword. Eris's heart rate sped up, and she focused intensely, thinking about the immense pressure the sword god brought as soon as he held his sword. Eris calmed herself down, thinking that Gal was not on the same level as Orsted, and remembered her reason for coming there. Eris regained her composure, which Gal also noticed. Shortly after, Eris was suddenly thrown out of the sword room. This showed how far Eris was from the current standing sword god, Gal. While observing Eris, Gal saw that she moved a little. He immediately called Ghislaine and ordered her to take care of Eris's wounds, and from now on, Eris would be a sword saint. He also declared he would start teaching her swordsmanship from tomorrow. One of his students angrily claimed that only those who learned the Sword of Light technique could be called sword saints. Gal immediately held his sword to the student's neck and explained that defeating 2 youngsters who knew that Sword of Light technique was enough. He added that one does not become a sword god by merely learning and acquiring some moves. He noted that although he is special, he doesn't receive any special treatment, so why should sword saints receive any? The student then apologized to him. In the next scene, while Ghislaine was treating Eris, she asked if Eris was frustrated because she was defeated earlier, to which Eris denied. She explained that if she thought about how helpless she was when Rudius was killed, it was nothing compared to that time. She added that when the Fit Toa region disappeared due to the teleportation incident, she relied solely on Rudius, and since being teleported, Rudius had always been protecting her. So she wanted to become stronger to not be a hindrance to him because the only thing she could do was swing her sword. She also said that when Rudius was killed by the dragon god, she couldn't do anything and was really just a burden. Ghislaine suggested it was just a bad matchup, but Eris admired Rudius's bravery even against the dragon god. She found it truly admirable, and that's why when she returned to Fitoa and found nothing left of her home and family, she didn't want to be left by the only person by her side. She wanted to start a family with Rudius. During those times, she realized how small Rudius was, younger and smaller than her. But despite that, he desperately tried to protect her, and that's when she finally realized she loved Rudius. But for her, she wasn't worthy of him, so she needed to become stronger and defeat Orsted with him. And when that day comes, they could get married, have many children, and live happily together. That was her resolve for coming to the Holy Land of the Sword. This is the story of a woman who would become known as the Mad Sword King, Eris Greirat. In the next scene, Eris was training with Gal. As Eris charged, Gal commented on the slowness of her movements. He said it wasn't sufficient because the sword god style emphasizes both speed and power, and past the advanced grade, Eris's sword swing has a name. The Sword of Silence, faster than the wind, and its advanced version, the Sword of Light. He mentioned that everyone who has reached the title of Sword Saint knows the Sword of Light, including Nina and Gino, whom she defeated. This means that Eris, who cannot use the Sword of Light, even though she holds the title of Sword Saint, is no different from weak small fries. If she can't use the Sword of Light, she shouldn't think about defeating Orsted. Eris stood up again, thinking that she knew her blade work was only at the level of the Sword of Silence, so it really wasn't enough, and she needed to figure out how to use the Sword of Light. Gal looked out the window and noticed the sky was beautiful. He suddenly announced that their training was over, which surprised Eris. In the next scene, Eris irritably walked around the town, and even those who approached her ended up being the target of her anger. The vendors were puzzled by her behavior. Gal had told her that the weather was nice today, so she should go out and have fun, and that was part of her training. She could train alone, but she didn't want just to be spit out. Since she went to town, she thought about practicing there. She then noticed a child from the beast race, finding him extremely cute. We know the Grey Rats have a soft spot for the beast race. It seemed the child was calling for adventurers and swordsmen. The young boy approached a man and asked for help because monsters had kidnapped his little sister, and if they didn't hurry, she might die. However, the man refused because he wanted to drink more. When the child pointed out that he could drink all night after saving her, the man got irritated and pushed him away. Eris arrived and caught the child. The man got irritated with her, but after bragging to her, Eris just beat him up. Eris explained to the child that if he relied on that man, it wasn't certain he could win against the monsters. The child became sad and said it was impossible if he was alone. Eris asked if his sister was also from the beast race, and when he confirmed, Eris volunteered to go with him. Initially, the child thought she was weak, but since she defeated the man earlier, he agreed and begged her to save his sister. And so, they went to a cave inside a forest south of the town. The child explained that a group of goblins had kidnapped his sister. It seemed there were no lookouts outside the cave, so they proceeded. Upon entering the cave, Eris asked how his sister was abducted, so the boy explained that near the cave, there were many materials they could sell for their daily food, so they were gathering them when the goblins arrived. As the child explained that they needed to do this to live, he was surprised that Eris did not scold him for being reckless or suggest there was something else they could do. So Eris explained that they needed to do it to eat and survive, and thinking wasn't her strong suit. While walking, they came across the corpse of a woman on the side of their path. It seemed she was an F-rank adventurer, and upon closer inspection, Eris noticed something unusual about her wounds. The boy asked what was wrong, but she brushed it off and drew her sword. Suddenly, a large number of goblins appeared, and they charged at the two. However, Eris easily sliced through all the goblins that rushed at them. She attacked, making the goblins seem like paper as she effortlessly cut through them. It was like a walk in the park for Eris as she flawlessly sliced through the monsters. A goblin tried to sneak up on her from behind, but she easily countered it. While fighting, Eris assessed herself and thought that such fast attacks were still not enough to match the sword saints in the dojo. Eris continued attacking while the boy just watched her. After that, Eris had eliminated all the enemies in that area. They decided to enter where the large number of goblins had come from, and as they continued, Eris hoped the boy's sister was in good condition, to which the boy sadly said he was sure of it. Because she remembered Rudius, who always said he was okay even in tough situations, she was pleased with the child and said he was right. Soon, they arrived at a cell room. There, the boy saw his sister Lip. Lip explained that she was okay and had been protected by others there. The boy felt relieved, while Eris eliminated the remaining goblins in that place. After that, they opened the cage and the beast brother and little sister beast reunited, bringing joy to both of them. As the others in the cage were leaving, they noticed something that brought fear to their faces. When Eris turned around, she saw a giant goblin, and those present explained that it was the one who had defeated them. Eris noticed the cleaver held by the goblin and realized that was the cause of the wounds on the corpse they found earlier. The others were shocked that Eris faced the giant goblin and told her to run. Driven by fear, Lip couldn't help but run, drawing the attention of the goblin. The goblin immediately charged to attack her. Lip tripped while running, and just as the goblin was about to catch her, Eris quickly got behind it and commented on its slowness. Eris sliced the goblin with just one swing, toppling the giant monster. Eris noticed something about her movement just then, so she repeated it and realized that, while it wasn't much different from what she normally did, her swing felt faster than usual. Thinking about what she had done, she remembered she wasn't alone there, so she regained her composure. She picked up Lip and handed him back to his brother, and the two adventurers also thanked her. In the following scene, they had returned to the town, and as they walked, the siblings kept pestering her to let them thank her. Initially, Eris said she didn't need anything, but after thinking for a bit, she came up with a request. Since the siblings said they would give her anything she wished for, she told them to let her hug them as long as she wanted. The siblings were surprised by this, but eventually they accepted it. Eris jumped towards them, and they happily embraced her tightly. In the next scene, Eris had returned to the dojo and was training again with Gal. Gal noticed something about Eris's attacks during this time, and after their session, he mentioned it seemed Eris had figured something out and it was really good that she went out and had some fun. Eris pretended to be clueless but also smiled, saying it seems not bad to go out and have fun while reminiscing about the bond she forged with the Beast Race siblings. In the next scene, Gal received a letter. He seemed to frown while reading it. His students were worried, wondering who had sent it, noting that Gal was reading it with an unusually disinterested expression. One of them mentioned that if they kept talking about it, they might get yelled at by the sword god, so they should focus instead. Suddenly, Gal crumpled the letter he was reading, his face showing irritation, and he threw it to the floor. The letter landed at Eris's feet, annoying her. She remarked that if Gal was going to throw it away, he should at least aim for the proper trash can. After that, Eris continued her training. Gal criticized her, saying Eris wasn't making progress with her training, and didn't she figure something out recently? He commented that at her current rate of progress, defeating the dragon god would remain a dream within a dream, to which Eris irritably told him to be quiet, knowing that already. Eris reflected that even though she had grasped something while fighting the goblins, she still wasn't making progress. While watching Eris continue to swing her sword, Gal glanced at the trash can. He suddenly had an idea and ordered Eris to leave the dojo and go to the person who wrote the letter for him. Eris asked why, and Gal questioned if it wasn't obvious. He said he wanted Eris to kill the author of the letter for him. Eris began her journey to that person, wondering how this became part of her training. She looked at the map, irritatingly saying she would get the longsword of light if she killed Gal's designated person. Before she left, Gal said that if she didn't obtain the longsword of light, she would just die. Therefore, Eris seriously declared she wouldn't die until she had killed the dragon god. As the sun set, she decided to camp for the night. She went beside a ruined structure and stayed there. She made a campfire using fire magic, taught to her by Rudius. While relaxing in front of the fire and wondering if she would reach her destination tomorrow, she sensed a presence in the bushes and asked who was there. 5 bandits emerged, commenting on how fine a woman she was and how nice her sword looked. They claimed to be bandits who had set up a base nearby, and that children would immediately cry upon seeing them. However, they said they don't kill just anyone because that was their boss's order, so if Eris left her sword and food, they might just let her go. They then asked what would Eris do to that. Eris refused to give them her belongings, saying they should be the ones to be quiet, and if they did, she might let them go. The bandits smirked and laughed, saying they could sell Eris for a large sum, or they would gain a lot from her beauty. They boasted that it was a 5 versus 1 fight, questioning if Eris had considered the difference in their strength. The bandits prepared to attack, and Eris noticed that even though they were bandits, they knew the sword god style. Eris remarked that it seemed the bandits wouldn't run from their fight, and as one bandit shouted, "Of course," the other suddenly got slashed across the face. Eris grinned while trash-talking them, calling them weaklings. 2 more bandits got annoyed and tried to charge, but before they could move, Eris easily knocked them down. The remaining bandit was terrified and tried to beg for mercy, thinking Eris was just a regular traveler. Eris then said that's why she asked if they were going to run or not. Before dying, the bandit commented that if Eris ever met their boss, it wouldn't end well. After finishing off the bandits, Eris decided to continue her journey. Slightly dismayed, she had to leave when the fire was strong. In the next scene, she arrived in a town. As she looked around the town, Eris pointed out that it was good there was a nearby town because the map she was given was very unclear. While searching for an inn or tavern to ask for directions, she came across some men harassing a woman, twisting her arm to make her come with them as the woman cried. The locals noticed that these men often did that, so some asked for help. Seeing that this was happening in front of a tavern, Eris approached them. The men teased her, thinking she wanted to join them, but Eris was just annoyed and told them to move because they were in the way. Bystanders were worried Eris might get beaten for what she was doing. The harassed woman tried to tell Eris not to get involved, to which Eris explained she had something to do inside the tavern and they were blocking her way, so the nuisances should clear off. The men got irritated with her and drew their swords. Eris noticed again that they were assuming a sword god-style stance, so she wondered if they were part of the group of bandits that attacked her recently. One of the men charged at her, boasting that this is what happens to those who act tough against them. The boastful aura of the man vanished when Eris easily parried his attack. Eris commented that they were somewhat stronger than those she had fought before. Eris repelled the man who attacked her, and he became irritated with his comrades for doing nothing, so he ordered them to charge. They all charged at Eris together, but even with their combined strength, they were still too weak for Eris. Suddenly, someone called out to her, and when she turned around, she saw a man with a cocky appearance. It turns out he was the boss of the men from earlier. He scolded his men for being defeated by a girl even though he had taught them the sword god style. Nevertheless, he declared he would take it upon himself to make amends and instructed Eris to prepare herself. Eris remarked that he seemed to be another weakling who didn't know his place, to which the boss retorted that they would see who was out of place and that it seemed he needed to teach her a lesson. The two clashed, but to Eris's surprise, the boss possessed the longsword of light. After parrying Eris's attack, the boss quickly launched another assault. Eris couldn't keep up with the man's speed, which surprised her. She was thrown against the wall with the force of his attack. The boss didn't kill her and sheathed his sword back. He knew his henchmen had caused trouble. He said he would take them home and didn't care about the woman from earlier. But they should continue bringing him food and money because no one in that town could beat him. The boss left, laughing at the bloodied Eris. Soon after, Eris lost consciousness, feeling the bitterness of defeat. In the next scene, Eris once again had a distressing dream. In it, she tried to run to Rudius to tell him that she had become stronger after training in the Holy Land of the Sword, so they could now fight together. When Rudius turned around, he was shown bloodied and questioned Eris's claim of being strong, noting she was still as weak as before. After that, she woke up, commenting on how terrible her dream was. She wondered where she was, and then suddenly her head started to hurt. Soon, she remembered what happened to her in the town, how she was knocked down. Then, the woman she saved from the men entered, delighted that Eris had finally woken up. It turns out Eris was in the house of that woman, where the woman's parents thanked her for saving their daughter from a dangerous situation against the bandits and for ensuring their child returned unharmed. Eris explained that it was good, but she hadn't really tried to save her and even lost consciousness in the end. The father insisted that, nevertheless, Eris truly saved their daughter. The woman stood up and personally thanked Eris. Without her, the outcome would have been dire. Eris asked if they had mentioned that those who troubled her were bandits, to which the woman confirmed and explained that they were part of a group of bandits who recently set up base near their town. Eris inquired what she meant by recently, so the father explained they didn't know why the bandits decided to settle in the town, but bandits are people who can put down their roots anywhere. He added that their area was originally a location with a goblin nest, but it seems those bandits drove the goblins out of their cave and made it their perfect hideout. However, they didn't just retreat and do nothing. Thinking it was just a small group of bandits, they recruited volunteers from the town and formed a vigilante group to hunt down the bandits. Unfortunately, they ended up failing. According to a man who went to fight and returned terrified of dying, they weren't just any bandits. Apparently, all of them were full-fledged users of the sword god style. Eris remembered they mentioned their so-called boss had taught them that. The father explained that those bandits had not been violent since their arrival in town until now, thinking they might have sensed it would be dangerous if they attracted the attention of the people. But they must have realized when they beat their vigilante group that they didn't have the power to oppose them, and then today, that happened. Eris asked what their plan was from now on. The father said it seemed they would send a request to the Adventurers Guild, and if those bandits were not only trained in the sword god style but also had swordsmen of advanced rank, their town would stand no chance against them. He added that even though it was his first time seeing the bandits' boss, he was sure the man was a sword saint, and although initially skeptical, seeing him firsthand made him certain. Eris was irritated to hear that the boss was a sword saint, but she quickly regained her composure, thinking it wasn't the time to be angry and that she wouldn't always be weak. She then took out the letter she received from Gal and placed it on the table. She explained she didn't care who told her, but she heard about a place called the Red Cave nearby and asked the father if he knew about it, thinking she needed to complete the task given to her so she could train again. The family was puzzled by Eris, prompting her to ask what was wrong. The father then explained that the Red Cave was the stronghold of the bandits. Eris pointed to the sender's name on the letter, Enzo Moreira, and asked if they knew who he was, to which the father believed the bandits said that was their boss's name. Eris smirked, realizing she had already encountered him, and immediately asked if someone could guide her to that cave, surprising the father, who asked if she planned to go there immediately, to which Eris agreed. When the man asked why she would do that and suggested waiting for the adventurers to arrive in town, Eris explained she had no time to waste and was ordered to kill the person who sent the letter to Gal. In the next scene, we go to the Red Cave. Enzo sat on one side, hearing the clang of equipment. Eris arrived, so he commented that they meet again. He noted that Eris did not bring the food and money he requested. Since Enzo called Eris young lady, she stopped him and told him her name. However, he didn't cease calling her that. Enzo asked what happened to his men, to which Eris replied that she had defeated them all. He then inquired about Eris's intentions and why she had come to their stronghold. When he asked if Eris was an adventurer who had come to take them down, she showed him the letter, which surprised Enzo. Eris explained she was there because the sword god had ordered her. The two stared at each other, and silence enveloped the area. Enzo was irritated because he had written in the letter that he wanted the sword god himself to come. Eris retorted that Gal had simply thrown the paper away, so he should be thankful that she had come instead. Enzo let go of the matter regarding Gal's action, remarking that it was typical of his character. After that, he stood up, acknowledging that Eris was fully aware of the implications, to which Eris agreed. Both drew their swords, and Enzo stated that he had shown Eris mercy the first time but wouldn't do so now. Eris countered that she would ensure Enzo's defeat, prompting Enzo to challenge her to try, derogatorily calling her little errand girl. Shortly, both prepared and charged at each other, filled with murderous intent. The battle between the two began, and the clash of their swords could be heard clearly. The intensity of their exchange was so great that it destroyed the surrounding objects. They matched each other in strength and speed, each observing the other's moves. Eris managed to block one of Enzo's attacks, and when Enzo followed up with another, Eris dodged it. Eris stepped back slightly, and Enzo commented that it seemed she was keeping up with his speed, but questioned how long Eris could continue to do so. Eris asked what Enzo was trying to say, to which Enzo responded that it didn't matter much to him, but at that rate, Eris would die. Enzo prepared to attack again, and Eris noticed that he was going to use the longsword of light, so she also prepared to counter it. However, upon impact, Eris couldn't withstand the force of the attack, which sent her flying into the wall. While lying against the wall, Eris remembered her conversation with Ghislaine about how to use the longsword of light. She had asked Ghislaine about it, but the only response was rationality, which puzzled her. Eris thought there must be tricks or secret special training to learn it, and a sword king like Ghislaine would know. Ghislaine explained that there was no such thing, leading Eris to ask how Ghislaine learned to use the longsword of light. Ghislaine then explained that the sword is not something where just swinging with all your strength helps you get faster. What's important is to follow logic and reason, as her master Gal always taught her. Do everything logically and rationally. Ghislaine demonstrated what she meant and explained that when your grip on your sword, your breathing, your center of gravity, footwork, and the swing of the blade are all held with reason. Your blade can surpass the speed of sound and reach the speed of light. Using what she taught, Ghislaine was able to slice a large tree in an instant. When Ghislaine asked if Eris understood, Eris's face showed dizziness and confusion. Ghislaine laughed because Eris seemed too young to learn that, which angered Eris because she laughed at her, so she immediately apologized. Ghislaine added that it was okay for her not to understand it now, and what's important is that she makes sure she's thinking, and if she does that, she's sure that Eris will be able to perform the longsword of light one day. After that, we return to the present where Eris rose again, prompting Enzo to comment that what Eris did in catching his attack was impressive. Eris remembered what Ghislaine said, that thinking is the most important part in using the Longsword of Light. She knew that initially, the Longsword of Light was designed as a one-hit kill move, and once unleashed, it would surely defeat your opponent. Moreover, if she compared Enzo's attack to Ghislaine's for the sword gods, she could still see it. Because of that, she decided not to attack and took a defensive stance, which irritated Enzo. Enzo was irritated because didn't Eris come there to kill him, and then that's all she would do. Enzo charged and unleashed a barrage of powerful attacks, hitting various parts of Eris's body. He then questioned if that is all the sword god's disciple can do. Eris focused on defending while observing Enzo's attack and how it differed from hers. The only thing that could match the Longsword of Light was another Longsword of Light, so the only way for Eris to win without knowing that move yet was to grasp the logic in Enzo's technique and bring out her own Longsword of Light. She continued to defend against Enzo's onslaught, and soon, Enzo lost interest in her. He no longer cared about the sword god and his pathetic opponent who couldn't even use the Longsword of Light. While Eris was wounded, she remained standing, so Enzo decided to finish it. As Enzo walked towards Eris, she suddenly attacked, but he managed to block it. Eris followed up with another attack, and when Enzo thought that Eris's attack could no longer affect him, he was forced to retreat. Eris's swing hit his cheek, surprising him. He knew to himself that he should have seen that attack, so he realized that Eris had quickly sped up during those times. As he observed, Enzo came to understand what was happening. Enzo stepped back, which irritated him, and he was in denial about being intimidated by Eris. Frustrated, he charged again, continuing to launch a series of attacks. He tried to end the fight, but despite his efforts, Eris was matching his pace. He couldn't believe that Eris was getting faster, which only made him angrier, unleashing a flurry of sword swings. They matched each other's swings, and their battle intensified. Both were infuriated with each other, and when their swords clashed, Enzo noticed that Eris had matched his speed. As their battle continued, Eris reflected on Ghislaine's teachings. Enzo charged again in anger, and Eris positioned herself. When Enzo's attack was about to hit her, Eris managed to use the sword god-style secret art, Longsword of Light, allowing her to slice Enzo with extraordinary strength and speed. Enzo was shocked by the turn of events, while Eris had grasped the logic of using the Longsword of Light. After receiving a powerful attack, Enzo finally fell. It was evident in Eris's eyes that she was also pleased to have achieved this. Enzo couldn't believe he was defeated by a young woman and felt that he had lost his touch in fighting. Eris pointed her sword at his neck and asked if he had any last words. Eris suggested he might want to leave a message for the sword god, to which Enzo replied, questioning if Eris thought that man would listen to her. He explained that their situation with the sword god had been the same for a long time. He used to train together with him in the Holy Land of the Sword. Back then, he was already a sword saint, and Gal was just a kid who had just arrived in the Holy Land. However, even though Gal was younger, he quickly caught up to his level. But no, that was wrong. Gal had surpassed him quickly, and from then on, he never won against Gal. No matter how many times he swung his sword, he couldn't catch up, and in fact, he was quickly repelled without even realizing it. He just laughed off the pain, and it was Gal who showed him the stark difference in their talent. He just accepted that he had no talent, and after some time, he was convinced of that, and he left the Holy Land. He ran and ran until he reached that cave. Eris commented on how worthless his life was, which irritated him. He said that Eris might seem strong, but she couldn't reach the level of the sword god. While explaining that Gal was indeed very strong and even called a genius by others, Eris simply said she didn't care, which puzzled him. Eris said her goal was to kill the dragon god, and that was it. She didn't care about the sword god anymore. Because of that, Enzo just laughed. After that, Enzo said he really had no message for Gal, and before Eris killed him, he encouraged her not to give up on her goal. In the next scene, Eris was back at the dojo, where Gal asked her how Enzo was. She called Enzo a sissy, which puzzled the sword god. Eris was irritated by his reaction and pointed out that he was the one who asked, and that was just her answer. Gal was surprised by Eris's wording and just laughed at it. In her mind, Eris was also puzzled, She had thought that, based on Enzo, Gal wouldn't care about him, but he still asked about him. Eris then wished Enzo had left a message for Gal. We return to the Red Cave, and inside, we see that Eris buried Enzo and placed his sword beside him, symbolizing that warriors live with their swords and rest with their swords. In the next scene, we move to the edge of a cliff, an hour's walk north from the holy land of the sword. With the water raging below and snow continuing to fall, we see Eris swinging her sword alone. The sword god instructed her to swing her sword with an empty mind, and when she gets tired, to sit down, rest, and think. When she gets tired of thinking, she should stand up again and swing her sword. She did this, continuing to swing her sword. She repeated the cycle of swinging and sitting. For food, she either brought it from the dojo's kitchen, or she ate magical beasts that attacked her sometimes. When it was cold, she brought firewood and would light it using magic. When she was sleepy, she would return to the dojo to sleep as much as she wanted. With every swing of her sword, she sharpened herself, a thin layer of herself was shed, and she became a little stronger. She wondered how many layers she needed to remove and how much more she had to do this to become strong. She explained here that after half a year of doing this repeatedly, she realized something. Swinging a sword is a difficult thing. When she was younger, she thought it was easier than studying, so it was more suited for her, and even now, that hasn't changed. But at least now she knows it's not easy. It seems she still couldn't lift and swing her sword correctly. She should be able to lift her sword faster and also be able to swing it faster. Compared to herself half a year ago, she's sure she's faster now. But compared to Ghislaine, she's still slower. Especially when compared to the sword god, and even more so to Orsted. Eris felt pain, and when she looked at her palms, they were full of blisters. Despite her situation, she didn't think it was hard because the first thing that came to her mind was the scene that happened to them at the Red Dragon's lower jaw. She said that compared to that, she could withstand anything. Eris took a deep breath and continued her training, thinking that 3 years had passed since that event and she felt she had become stronger, but she still had a long way to go. In the next scene, a man with a peacock tattoo on his face arrives, looking for someone to help him explore the area. Eris then appears, so he tries to speak to her for assistance. Just as he was about to introduce himself, she felt a strange presence that made her body shudder. She found herself forced to step back, facing what seemed like a starving beast. Eris, irritated, told him to get out of her way. The man introduced himself as Aubert, the peacock sword, and it seemed he thought Eris was a disciple of the sword god. While he was still explaining, Eris, irritated, charged at him for blocking her path. Aubert managed to block Eris's sudden attack, and she followed up, forcing Aubert to draw another sword. When Eris swung again, Aubert stepped on her sword and followed up with a stab aimed at her face. Eris let go of her sword and rolled away to dodge. Aubert kicked her sword away, and then Eris pounced towards him. Eris prepared to punch, but before she could reach him, he hit her face with the handle of his sword. Eris still managed to grab onto his sword, surprising him. Aubert realized Eris wanted to take his sword, so he kicked it away from her. Eris flew towards her sword and quickly stood up, making Aubert realize she wouldn't stop until he had killed her. Because of this, Aubert got serious and prepared to end their fight. Just as the two were about to fight to the death, Gal suddenly arrived and immediately stopped them. Aubert kneeled to show respect to the sword god, and it seemed Gal was expecting the arrival of this North Emperor. It turns out that Gal had sent a letter to Aubert to come there, and it seemed to be related to Eris. Eris, irritated, immediately left to rest. When Gal asked if Eris was impressive, Aubert said she was the most ferocious swordsman he had ever met. Eris was like a wild beast. That's when he realized she was the one they referred to as the Mad Dog. As soon as Eris reached her room, she fell asleep from exhaustion. In the next scene, Ghislaine arrived, irritated with Gal for finding out he wouldn't teach Eris. Gal pointed out that he had already taught her, to which Ghislaine said no. She was referring to how to train. He then asked if she was referring to how to practice using the sword. Ghislaine insisted that Gal just repeated what he always does. His teaching of do everything logically. She criticized the training method Gal gave to Eris, saying that having her practice sword swinging every day like an idiot lacked any logical approach or strategic thinking. She clearly expressed her disappointment while questioning where the logic was in such a repetitive and thoughtless routine. When Gal asked since when Ghislaine became such a headache, she said it was before she returned there. Gal got irritated with her and seemed to think she no longer listens to her master. Just as Ghislaine was about to explain, Gal immediately drew his sword and pointed it at her. He began to regret how he raised Ghislaine. He explained that the Ghislaine who used to be like a starving tiger had become a kitten with its fangs removed. If she had continued as she was, she could have become a sword emperor by now. He added that he would not pull out anybody's fangs anymore, which Ghislaine did not understand. She also asked why he was refusing to instruct Eris, who now seemed pitiable. Gal explained to Ghislaine that if anyone wanted to surpass him, they could do so by embracing the concept of logic. He emphasized that his success was the outcome of pushing logic to its extreme. He added that becoming the sword god requires not just a logical pursuit, but also a significant amount of effort and talent. He then shifted the topic, saying Eris's aim was not to become the sword god, but to defeat Orsted, the dragon god. He explained that this man is an existence beyond the concept of logic. He's a monster without equal, and Eris would not win against him using his teachings alone. He also pointed out that training isn't just about learning from someone, especially if there's a specific goal in mind. Merely following others' advice without thinking is pointless. Because of this, Ghislaine commented that he always says complicated things. Gal laughed and explained that, in short, it's not enough for Eris to learn just from him, so he made various arrangements, including Aubert. Aubert introduced himself as Aubert Corvette, the North Emperor, also known by many as the Peacock Sword. When Ghislaine asked why a practitioner of the North God style was there, Aubert explained that the sword god had requested him to teach one of his disciples. Ghislaine turned to Gal, irritably asking why he planned to teach Eris the North God style, which wasn't suited to her because of its underhanded tactics. Gal replied that it's because the dragon god uses it. Ghislaine thought she hadn't heard that the dragon god used it, and if the dragon god indeed used it, it means the North god ranks second among the 7 great powers. She was shocked and questioned what kind of being the dragon god is, to which Gal said he didn't know. But he mentioned that Orsted has fully grasped and mastered all the foundations of those styles, including the sword god and North god style. Naturally, if you use one of them, he will counter it and then use the same against you, meaning you need to learn all the styles if you want to fight him on equal terms. Eris then asked if Gal planned to also call a practitioner of the water god style, to which Gal said he had already sent a letter. Ghislaine understood their conversation, and her tail moved as if she was a pleased cat. Gal thought he still understood how to read Ghislaine's feelings well. After that, Ghislaine showed respect to Aubert and hoped he would enjoy his stay with them, to which Aubert agreed. He would leave Eris in Aubert's care. In the end, Eris began her training in the North God style, and the day she would be recognized as North Saint would come a year later. And there ends the story of Eris. I hope you liked the video. Like and subscribe for more.